Good morning. My name is Jessica Giganzik. I am the Vice President of Events for the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. Thank you all so much for joining us today. For those of you who are new to the Council Town Hall, we are a nonprofit 501c3 with the mission of informing our members and audiences about the most compelling international, national, and regional issues. We are a nonpartisan organization, and an important part of our programs is that we enable our audiences to ask questions of the speakers to foster a more engaged discussion. When the stay-at-home orders began in March, we pivoted from our usual in-person events to these live streams, which we are providing as a free public service. Our in-person events provided necessary income for us covering our operating expenses. That is why we are dependent upon your support to help us keep these quality programs going. Please stay tuned immediately following the program to find out how you can become part of our community by becoming a member and making a donation. You can make a difference. Thank you. Today's program is part of our 2020 election series, which takes place Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Pacific time until Election Day. We are incredibly grateful to the sponsors of this series, the Bay Foundation, the Mader family, Joel and Joanne Mogi, and Andrew Tavicoli. Thank you so much for making this series possible. It is my honor to introduce today's event, a conversation with California Secretary of State Alex Fedea, led by Politics Professor Dan Schnur. We'll be taking your questions in about 20 minutes. You can submit your questions by entering them on the questions section on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll get to as many of those questions as possible. So without further ado, Dan, I'm going to turn this conversation over to you, and Secretary Padilla, thank you so much for joining us today.
Jessica, thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for joining us here today for this very important conversation with California's Secretary of State Alex Fedea. And Secretary Padilla, thank you so much for taking time out of what has to be an extraordinarily busy pre-election schedule to be with us.
Oh, to put it mildly, but I think as we'll touch on over the next 20 minutes, some important changes to how we are administering the election this November that everybody needs to be aware of. So I think just to sum it up, California will not make people choose between being able to exercise their right to vote and protecting their health and that of their loved ones. And we're certainly gearing up for the most consequential election in a generation. So glad to be here.
Well, we're grateful to have you here. And as Jessica mentioned, I'll ask some questions of you to get the conversation going for about the next 20 minutes or so. And at that point, what I think you already suspect, Alex, is that's when the questioning gets much more interesting, because that's when I step aside and our very informed participants will be sending their questions to Jessica for you to answer as well. But for as long as I have a portion of the stage, I think where I'd like to start is with the broadest possible question, then we can narrow down. As you and I have talked about previously, the University of California, Berkeley Institute of Governmental Studies, at a poll that came out just yesterday, that showed a large plurality of Californians have concerns about how this election will be administered. Now, it's very clear from the way the poll was framed that those concerns are based on the national political landscape. Those are not concerns about California's administration of campaigns. We know that the process will work very effectively and smoothly here, thanks to you and your team. But maybe you can talk a little bit about those concerns and how you and your team are working to make sure that the people of California can be reassured that this election will be conducted in the appropriate way that they expect.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think that's a great way to start the conversation with this sophisticated audience here. As sad as those findings may be, we stop and think about it, they're really not surprising or shocking given the attacks from a number of quarters, concentrated in a few, but a number of quarters about the integrity of our election or vote by mail that are frankly baseless. And so what it's done, as demonstrated in the survey, is it's made the job of state and local elections officials that much harder to educate the public and educate voters about the safeguards that we take in election to protect not just the accuracy of the results, but the integrity of the process, and certainly informing voters about the options they'll have to be able to vote and vote safely this November. So I would be interested to see a sort of a breakout, what Californians think of California elections separate and apart from the national climate, because the national climate, not just in the last couple of days, last couple of weeks, but for the last 4 years, has left a lot to be desired. If I look at other recent surveys about California elections, and maybe more specifically vote by mail, because that's going to be the centerpiece for how we're preparing for this November general election, I think the confidence, if you will, in vote by mail in California is much higher. Unfortunately, it too is cutting more along partisan lines than it has historically, once again, a result of some of the rhetoric we hear on a national basis. But, we stand by the integrity of the process and the system here in California, and happy to answer any more specific questions about the safeguards in place.
Right. Well, I don't know about you, but I stopped making political predictions 3 years and about 11 months ago. But if I were to make one here, I would suspect that if the question had been asked in a more state-specific way, the levels of confidence would be much, much higher. So maybe what you can do to follow up, though, on that original point is tell us a little bit about this tremendous undertaking. Tell us what you and the team working with you have done to prepare California for this critical election, and then what should we be doing as voters and as citizens over the next 35 days?
That's great. And in the interest of time, I'll try to give the short version of these answers. But look, we knew coming into 2020 that it was going to be a big civic engagement year. And I say civic engagement, not just elections, because we're also participating in the decennial census. So one quick plug on the census. I'm sure everybody here has done it already, but you can help spread the word to any family members or friends that have not. Time is running out, a lot at stake. Please respond to the census. But 2020 obviously was a big year, starting with the March primary, right? California moved its primary up to March to be more meaningful in the primary schedule. And I think we did that. Record registration, record turnout in March, and all indicators pointing towards even stronger participation in the general election. But the primary was before the COVID outbreak as we've known it. And so soon after the primary, as we were still processing the final ballots from the primary, that's when declarations of emergency were issued, stay-at-home orders, etc. And so quickly we knew we needed to huddle with not just the governor's office and legislative representatives, but county elections officials, voting rights advocates, and others to answer this question. How do we go about administering the November general election in a way that continues to be as accessible as possible to all eligible voters, as secure as possible, because we've been discussing that a lot over the last 4 years, and now is as safe as possible given the COVID-19 pandemic. And so here's the short version of what everybody needs to know. We've decided to send every active registered voter a vote by mail ballot in advance of the November election. Automatically, you don't need to request it, don't need an excuse. So the 21 million voters on the rolls in California will get a vote by mail ballot. Counties will send them out no later than October 5th. So that's next week. It's coming up. When voters receive that ballot, they'll have various options for how to return the ballot. By mail, despite the Postal Service being in the news lately, I still think that's a reliable option. And California is so committed, you don't even need to scramble for stamps. Return postage is prepaid. If you prefer, you can also return your ballot to any official ballot drop box in your county in the weeks leading up to the election, or frankly, walk it in and drop it off in person at any in-person voting location, both on and before election day. Now, I mentioned the in-person voting location because this should not be considered an all vote by mail only election. Every active registered voter will receive a ballot by mail, but for voters who need the in-person option, they'll have it. We've been working with counties to ensure as many safe in-person opportunities to vote both on and before election day. So in-person early voting. We're encouraging people who can to vote early, whether it's by mail or in person. Vote early, because the more people who vote early should shorten those lines, reduce the crowd sizes of folks who wait till Tuesday, November 3rd to vote. And if you're going to be one of those in-person voters, it's kind of like we don't go to the grocery store the same way anymore. Bring your masks, look for the signage. We're going to have the physical distancing in place. plenty of hand sanitizer, PPE for poll workers, all the measures we need to keep both poll workers and voters safe. But if you want to vote by mail, that's our strongest recommendation. And, to the last part of your question about what voters can do to prepare now, I think starting today, 3 things. If you haven't registered to vote yet, what are you waiting for? We make it easy in California. Go to vote.ca.gov. The first option there is register to vote. You can register to vote there. If you're already registered, the second option is to verify your registration status. Good idea to check that just to make sure your record is up to date and current, especially your address. Because as we're about to send out vote by mail ballots, we want to make sure we're sending it to you at your current address. Let's avoid any delays or confusion. If you need to update your registration, go back to the register to vote function and you can do it there. And the third bit of advice is to sign up for Where's My Ballot? It's our ballot tracking tool available to all voters statewide. You can sign up to receive alerts by email, by text message, or automated phone calls on the status of your ballot through the postal delivery process. You'll get the notification when the county sends you your ballot, so you can start checking that mailbox. All the way through to the back end, imagine a confirmation when your ballot was received, and then imagine getting that final confirmation that your ballot was counted. Great for transparency, great for accountability, and I think great for peace of mind in vote by mail.
So that was a short answer covering an admirable amount. In fact, you managed to answer my next 4 questions. So very, very, very impressive. You've clearly done this before. I do have a couple of follow-ups though. We've read a lot in the news over the last several days about how many mail ballots are disqualified. Problems with signatures, problems with other types of just human errors that people make when they're voting by mail for the first time. What cautions can you offer those of us who are taking your advice in voting by mail to making sure that our ballot is counted in addition to signing up for the tracking process?
Yeah, no, that's great. So in addition to the tracking, let's kind of break it down why as many ballots in the primary election, for example, were disqualified. The main 2 reasons are, number 1, ballots arrived too late or were postmarked too late. It's the vote by mail equivalent of getting to your polling place at 8:20 on election night, right? The poll has closed. And so if you vote by mail, if you return your ballot by mail, the general advice is sooner rather than later. California law says as long as it's postmarked on or before election day, it can arrive up to 17 days after the election this November and still be counted, but it must be postmarked on or before election day. So that postmark is critical. A good number of the ballots disqualified in the primary were postmarked after election day. So on election day itself, you can take it to a mailbox, but be mindful of when that last pickup is, or to be extra sure, drop it off at any in-person voting location just to make sure it's back on a timely basis, or do it early. So that's one reason for a significant number of ballots being disqualified, which I think will go down significantly because of the extension to 17 days after the election instead of the current 3. The other reason for disqualifying ballots is signature issues. One of the important safeguards we have to protect the integrity of the vote by mail process, when you return your vote by mail ballot, it's got to come in the official envelope and you sign the outside of the envelope where indicated. The first thing county officials do is they compare that signature on the envelope to your signature on file as part of your voter registration, as part of confirming the identity of the voter and ensuring against double voting. If a voter forgets to sign the envelope, or if the signatures do not match, we now require counties to attempt to contact the voter to cure that issue. You have plenty of time before the results are certified and audited. So if you get a call in the days after the election from your county, you probably want to take it and address that signature issue. But with those 2 things, I think will make a big dent in the number of ballots that were previously disqualified, because we want to make sure every eligible voter has their voice heard in the election.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago the fact that California sends a ballot to every registered voter. A few weeks ago, we did a program with Representative Kevin McCarthy, who pointed to the fact that many states send an application to every voter, but then rely on the voter to send their application back before receiving a ballot, and he argued that that was a more cautious approach to take. Can you talk a little bit about why California's approach makes more sense from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of reasons, and it's a classic example of how each state does things a little bit different, right? The Constitution of the United States delegates the authority over elections to states. Look, we think there's sufficient safeguards in place to protect the integrity of the election through signature verification and other measures that from a security standpoint, we felt comfortable bypassing the application piece and just sending voters their ballot directly. We're living in unprecedented times during a global health pandemic with still no vaccine. We should be making it easier for people to vote and protect their health, not harder. And so bypassing the application process to send everybody ballots, I think it was a smart thing to do to make voting easier for the voters in the state. And let's not forget the issues of the Postal Service lately, right? There's been some power struggles at the top, changes in policies, delays in Postal Service delivery times, both real and perceived. And so by sending every active registered voter a ballot, we're only having to account for the ballot getting to the voter and the ballot coming back. For the states that are sending vote by mail ballot applications, it's double the back and forth time because the application has to get to the voter and then back to the county, and then the ballot has to go out and then get back to the county. That's a lot in a small amount of time, while there's still questions about the Postal Service. So I think this was the smart way to go.
So let's follow up on the point that you made about some of the recent controversies at the U.S. Postal Service. Even given the controversies, you made it very clear earlier, just as we were getting started, that you have confidence in the USPS's ability to do what they need to do, and so therefore you are assuring us, if possible, to vote by mail. Tell us why you're that confident.
Yeah, well, it starts with a vote by mail is nothing new in California. We've been doing it successfully for decades, and it's growing in popularity every election cycle. Just as a benchmark, in the March primary, more than 70% of ballots cast were vote by mail ballots. And so with that experience, it's not just elections administrators, it's not just voters, it's also representatives of the Postal Service, from supervisors and managers all the way to postal workers, mail handlers, letter carriers, etc. California postal workers know what they're doing when it comes to the delivery of elections materials on a timely basis. So between that, the timelines we have built in, again, counties have to send vote by mail ballots out no less than 29 days before the election. Our postmark plus 17 policy that I described a few minutes ago, and frankly, the transparency and accountability that Where's My Ballot now enables. While it's great for voters to be able to track their ballot, just like you track your packages when you're shopping online, it provides for us a tremendous dashboard, right? We can look at real-time traffic of ballots through the mail, and we're able to identify any bottlenecks or delays, and can work with regional or local Postal Service representatives to keep the ballots moving on a timely basis. So, all those measures in place, it still gives me that comfort level in the Postal Service as an option to return your ballot. But it's not your only option. If you're still a little hesitant, you can take it to your Dropbox in your county, or you can drop it off in person during the days of in-person early voting.
But you are confident, and I say this is, you've done an admirable job over the years of separating your registration as a proud partisan Democrat from the nonpartisan responsibilities of this office. But you, as a Democratic leader in this state, are confident in the Postal Service's ability to fulfill their role in this process.
It may be a little bit in the category of trust but verify, but we are trusting and we are verifying.
How about local elected officials? Even though California has a much larger percentage of vote by mail being done historically, we are going to see unprecedented numbers of mail ballots this year. Are you confident that local election officials have the capacity, given that increased load, especially given that we ran into some challenges here in Los Angeles County during the March primary?
Right. So let me mention a couple of things because, right, we as impressive as the 70% plus figure was in the primary, we're talking, probably at least 80%, if not, higher for the general. And so the two things I want to touch on is number one, we're not starting just now. I mentioned we started huddling soon after the primary election. And as we collectively made the decision to recommend to the governor first and then to the legislature that every active registered voter in California should receive a vote by mail ballot, we immediately proceeded to do a county by county assessment of what it would take to successfully administer the election that way. Different counties having different levels of historic vote by mail participation. So to ramp up to sending everybody about, did that mean we needed additional staffing or additional equipment or additional staff training or a combination of all of the above? So we have specific plans jointly with each county to make sure that they are ready for the significant increase of vote by mail in November, while being prepared for an in-person flex if that materializes as well. So feel confident with the professionalism and preparations of every county in the state. But I'll tell you, one of the things that we should start thinking about, Dan, is what the increase in vote by mail means for our traditional election night experience. Right. In California, we're already more than a little familiar with, we have a decent sense for how most contests are going to turn out on election night. But for close contests and for final numbers, it takes us literally weeks to finish counting the ballots because it takes a while to process vote by mail ballots. So that's nothing new for California, but for the first time, we're going to see that dynamic play out in states like Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania. And if the presidential contest is too close to call in a sufficient number of battleground states, we could all be going to bed on Tuesday, November 3rd, not knowing who the winner is. And be wary of anybody declaring victory when there's still a ton of ballots that remain to be counted. And so if it takes a few more days than typical for a winner to be projected or called, that's not the time to panic. It's a time to be patient. It's the process at work. There's ample time for elections officials across the country to finish doing their job. We'd rather get it right than get it fast, and it'll be done well in time before the Electoral College vote in December and the first day of the new session of Congress in January.
I saw polling about a month ago that showed about 1/3 of Americans understood that instead of an election night, we could end up having election week or even election month. More recently, that number had increased to 2/3, but 1/3 of the American people still do think in terms of traditional election night. How concerned are you about panic, about unrest when those results aren't finalized in a way that we've come to expect in the modern era?
Well, that's why we're talking about it now and not waiting until election night to begin to explain both to the general public and frankly to the press. The press corps has a tremendous, not just opportunity, but responsibility to help convey that understanding and convey that message. So just like I said, be wary of candidates claiming victory when there's still a lot of ballots to be counted. Be wary of news outlets that are declaring winners when there's still a lot of ballots to be counted. And that, you mentioned this could be election week or election month. It's frankly an election season because we can start voting 29 days before what we consider election day. We should rename election day, by the way. It's simply the last day to vote with so many early voting options. And of course, the counting isn't concluded on election night. It takes weeks after to finish counting ballots and auditing before certifying results. The other thing that I think this window and dynamic presents, we're busy enough trying to counter election misinformation and disinformation prior to the election. I'm sure we'll be grappling with it through election day and in the days after the election. Again, if there's races that are too close to call, I can imagine there's an opening for those who want to amplify conspiracy theories or lies about what's happening. It's not the election getting rigged, it's ballot processing at work. It's a transparent process to ensure the integrity of the election. So let's all be mindful of election misinformation and disinformation, especially on social media. For answers to your questions, go to the official source, your county elections department, or the California Secretary of State.
My last question, then Jessica will come on and we'll get to hear the smarter questions from our audience members and participants, is even given that we should be thinking about election season, should election day itself, the first Tuesday after the 1st November, in the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, should election day be a federal holiday?
I think that'd be great. You know, I more than endorse that idea. But having served in government for more than 20 years now, I know how easy it isn't to get that to be a federal holiday. And so, actually, I think the election model that we have in California, the Voters' Choice Act, is that and maybe a little bit better. Right, the counties that have transitioned to the Voters' Choice Act have the universal vote by mail option. And then the in-person voting options, the flexibility of any voter to go anywhere in their county convenient to them over the course of 11 days. And so you get to pick your own holiday. Do you want to vote, on Tuesday, November 3rd? Do you want to vote a week in advance? Do you want to vote over the weekend? You get to decide when, where, and how you vote. So until the federal holiday comes about, we can still advance reforms in California that, frankly, make it easier for voters.
Great. I have one last question, Alex, that I will save for the conclusion of the program at the end of the hour. But at this point, I will step aside, and this is where I think the conversation becomes more interesting when Jessica and our participants' questions takes up.
All right, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Secretary Padilla. This first question is a non-voter related question, but I'm going to start off. It's from Tony Cordero in San Pedro. And he says, Alex, what's your fondest memory of St. Vincent de Paul Ranch Camp?
Wow, memories from childhood. A whole lot of singing, a lot of crafts during St. Vincent de Paul Ranch Camp. But I just came across a makeshift drama award. I forget the production, I forget what it was, but we do have some souvenirs from the good old days. Thanks for checking in.
Thank you. All right, so the rest of these are all Secretary of State cap back on. So I recently read a CNN article that showed that many minority and young voters' ballots were at an increased risk of rejection due to discrepancies with signature verification. It said roughly 2% of ballots are usually rejected, but Black voters were seeing nearly 8% of their signed ballots being rejected. There's another questioner that asked also about, she has elders in their 90s with tremor and arthritis whose signatures have changed compared to their very old driver's licenses. How is signature matching being handled here in California? And what systems are in place to ensure each vote counts and is valid?
Yeah, and again, I think similar to the question about public confidence in elections earlier, that CNN article, I believe, is sort of a national snapshot. So each state handles it differently. In California, I think those rejection rates are a lot lower. But because of my concern of protecting people's voting rights, that's why we have the measures in place that I described. Counties are required to attempt to contact the voter to address any signature issues that they may come across. The other thing to keep in mind, we have some small counties where maybe more ballots are processed manually, and have some large counties where we do use technology to conduct that signature comparison and signature verification. No ballot is ever disqualified by a machine. Right, if some of the software technology determines that it's not enough of a match for a signature, it gets set aside for secondary review by a human being. In most counties, also a third review by a human being, many times the registrar themselves before making a final call. And even then, if the signature is determined to not be a sufficient match, the county must contact the voter and offer an opportunity for that signature issue to be cured. So be on the lookout if that applies to you. For the folks who think maybe my signature's changed enough over time, I know mine has since I first applied for a driver's license. You'll have an opportunity to update that signature. And if you've been voting by mail and you haven't gotten that kind of call, you didn't get that kind of call in the primary, that means you're probably okay.
Sorry, where can we find information about the location of Dropboxes and early voting locations for drop-off purposes? How often are the Dropboxes emptied and how secure are they?
Very, very great questions. And so the information is not finalized yet by each county, counties will be mailing out as part of their materials to voters those locations and the schedules of either the Dropboxes or the in-person voting locations. Once they're finalized, we also upload them on our site. So again, all the tools and resources at vote.ca.gov. It's no longer just find your polling place, because some places find your polling place or find your vote center or find your Dropbox, but all the locations that are available to you as a voter, you can search them at vote.ca.gov, a little bit closer to the election. Dropboxes are emptied on a regular basis by county elections offices, and those ballots retrieved back to the county elections office for processing, and always in teams of 2. This is an important, it may seem like a minor detail, but it's an important regulation. There's no individual that's ever going to collect ballots and transporting them back to the county elections office. It's always done in teams of 2 as a safeguard, give people confidence that county elections offices are doing everything appropriately. And the safeguards that are in place, like there's many drop boxes that are somewhere where there's a human being with eyeballs on it on a regular basis, or security cameras. In the few instances where it's not, regulations require literally military type grade drop boxes to help protect against any theft or vandalism or anything along those lines. So every option for voting is a secure one, whether it's by mail, by Dropbox, or in person.
Thank you. In the March primary, Los Angeles County had reduced the number of voting locations by 75%. Is the state doing anything to expand voting locations for November 3rd?
So I do believe that the experience for Los Angeles County voters in November is going to be much better than it was in the primary. I think one of the significant differences that we anticipate for November is every active registered voter receiving their ballot in advance of the election. That did not happen in March. In March, of the 15 Voters' Choice Act counties, things ran pretty smoothly in 14 of them. Los Angeles County was the exception, and that was the one county where voters didn't get the ballot in advance of the election. So there was a disproportionate load, if you will, on the vote center locations. There were other issues, some technology issues, some poll worker training issues, and we worked with the county to make sure that they have better plans and preparations in place for November. So I think it will be a lot better, both because more people will exercise the vote by mail option on the natural, on COVID-19 considerations on top of that, but that we've put the proper improvements in place to make the in-person voting experience better for people who need it.
Thank you. This next questioner says, the secretary said ballots will go out to all registered active voters. What is the definition of an active voter?
All right, getting into the details here on what we call list maintenance. So when you're registered to vote, you don't have to re-register every election, right? You stay on the rolls. But federal law does allow local jurisdictions, if there's a voter that hasn't shown up in a few years, counties can attempt to contact the voter to make sure they still live there and want to maintain their voter registration there. If those attempts to contact the voter go unresponded to, experience tells us there's a chance that person doesn't live there anymore. And so they're kind of taken off the mailing list, if you will. They're still preserved on the voter file, the voter registration database. So if you've ever shown up and you swear you're a registered voter, but it's been a few years and your name's not on the roster and you're asked to vote provisionally, that's a classic example of what happens. That ballot comes back, they reactivate your registration, you're back on the active status, and your ballot is counted. And so that's what we mean. We're not mailing ballots automatically to people that there's a chance that they don't live there anymore. They're only going to active registered voters. You can avoid that scenario for yourself, by the way, simply by verifying your registration status, by going onto the site, confirming your voter registration information is up to date and current, automatically makes sure that you're on that active list. So go to vote.ca.gov and do it today.
Thank you. Will the ballots be marked on the outside with the party affiliation?
Ballots are not marked on the outside for party affiliation. At times that's an issue in primary elections because of, especially in a presidential primary, there's some national party rules that come into play. But for the general election, your vote is secret. The ballot is safe, secure, and private on the inside of an envelope. The only identifying features on the outside of a vote by mail envelope have to do with the voter themselves. Obviously, you have to sign as part of our signature verification protocols, and also know that each vote by mail ballot comes with a unique barcode unique to that voter. That's what enables our ballot tracking system and what enables county officials to immediately update a voter's record when their vote by mail ballot has been returned, so that if that same voter tries to vote in person, the voting location will know that person already submitted a vote by mail ballot and cannot vote twice.
Thank you. And the barcode is randomized as well, so it's not like all the, Democrat barcodes are printed one way and then.
Exactly. There's so many fields as part of a voter registration record, so unique barcodes.
Cool. Do you see any evidence of potential foreign interference in this election?
Look, the potential is always there, and that's why our job never rests. So let me just make a couple of comments in two different categories. If we go back to what we learned in the 2016 election cycle through the 18 cycle and to today, we know that attempts at interference come in two areas. One, are there attempts to infiltrate our infrastructure, if you will, maybe change the votes or the election results? There's been no hacker breach in California, and it's our job to help keep it that way. We have worked with counties to either upgrade or replace their voting systems to systems that meet our higher security standards, which are higher, by the way, than what even the federal agencies recommend. So I think from an infrastructure standpoint, we're in good shape. Machines are not allowed to be connected to the internet, so we make it impossible to systematically hack or rig an election. And yes, California requires paper ballots and voter verifiable paper audit trail. The other type of potential foreign interference, and this is one that does cause me a little stress, if you will, is the damage done by election misinformation and disinformation. We know that there's multiple sources for erroneous, misleading information about the elections, even about the process, that tends to circulate, especially on social media platforms. And so that's why we encourage people, if you have questions, go to the official source. Contact your county elections office or the Secretary of State's office to get your questions answered. And if you see anything suspicious online, you can report it to us for review. At vote.ca.gov, one of the options you have there is election cybersecurity information. We have a whole portal where you can screenshot and send us a tweet that raises alarm bells, or a Facebook post or Instagram item that causes you concern. We have ways of working with social media companies to do prompt reviews of those items. And if a social media company thinks that it is misleading and erroneous, they end up taking it down the vast majority of the time.
Thank you. Where do Republican voters live in the state? Are they more in Northern or Southern California?
There's Republican voters in every county in the state, just like there's Democratic voters in every county in the state. And frankly, a lot of no party preference voters in other political parties in every county in California.
Thank you. This question is, if vote by mail ballots are mailed on, I'm getting that one wrong. If I vote by mail early and it is received by election day, will my ballot be counted on election night?
Well, the earlier you return your vote by mail ballot, then the higher the likelihood that your vote will be counted on election night. We have adjusted the rules in California for this November to allow counties to begin to what we call process ballots earlier than previously. Doesn't mean that they're being counted, and we're certainly not going to be given any partial results before the polls close on election day. But we do want to give counties the ability to start processing what we anticipate is going to be a big increase in vote by mail ballots earlier, which means conducting that signature verification that we've been talking about, probably sorting ballots in a way that once they start running through the tabulation devices on election night, can lead to more results to be reported on election night than we've been used to in the past. But again, final numbers won't come for a few weeks, and either way, your ballot will be counted. And for that ultimate assurance, sign up for Where's My Ballot?
Thank you. If you're already a vote by mail voter, will you get your normal vote by mail ballot, or should you just return the vote by mail ballot that you said will be sent to all voters?
Yeah, if you're a vote by mail voter, a lot of permanent vote by mail voters in California, then nothing's really changing, right? There's no different ballot that's going to a previous vote by mail voter versus someone who may be voting by mail for the first time. The ballots are the ballots. It's just our procedures on sending a vote by mail ballot to every active registered voter this November because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. What are the other important issues on the ballot for November 3rd? Federal, state, and Los Angeles County?
Great question. And instead of just picking a couple, it's a great reminder that, look, every election's important, and it's not just, who's at the top of the ticket. A lot of attention, obviously, this year because of the presidential contest, but other federal, state, and local officials are on the ballot, along with public policy. There's 12 state initiatives, propositions on the ballot for the voters to weigh in on. And in many local jurisdictions, there could be a county measure, a city measure as well. I know there's a couple that are particularly important to me, but I think for every voter, depending on your concerns, if it's public safety, if it's access to healthcare, if it's climate change, if it's a social justice measure, you decide what's most important for you, and that's your reason to make sure you register and you vote. I will point out two elections-related measures on the statewide ballot. Proposition 17 would restore voting rights to individuals that are formerly incarcerated, maybe on parole, but no longer in state prison. We can catch up with many other states across the country in re-enfranchising those individuals more quickly if that measure is approved. Proposition 18 would allow young people who are going to be 18 years old and eligible to vote in a general election to vote in their primary election, regardless of what month their birthday is in. So those are just two that I'll highlight as elections-related propositions, but a lot more, and a lot more that's also important from a policy perspective.
Thank you. This has obviously come at an unprecedented time to be trying to do mail-in balloting on this level and also dealing with the pandemic. How has your office and your staff been balancing the work from home and everyone that will be having to count these ballots with working from home and following safety measures?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I mentioned at the top of the program, just like the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted every single facet of our daily lives, elections are no different. And so I think there's a couple things that worked in our favor. Our primary election was behind us by the time the stay-at-home orders were being issued, but that doesn't mean that the ballot processing steps were completed. And so in real time, we had to work with counties to adjust the ballot processing procedures with physical distancing and other measures to get through the primary election and certifying the results. So we learned through that experience, helps better prepare us for November. We also had the opportunity to observe all the other states. California was among the first states to vote in the primary. So many other states conducted their primary elections during the heat of the pandemic. And so, we were able to offer some experience and some advice, but we're able to learn from others' experience as we prepared for this November as well. And then I mentioned working with each county to have specific game plans for their county. So a lot of work, things are happening differently, but between what we can do remotely, we will. What we can't do remotely, we're physical distancing in the office, masks, hand sanitizer, all the steps that we need to take to keep everybody safe. But it's our duty and responsibility to ensure an accessible, secure, and safe election this November, and we're on track to do so.
Thank you. A lot of our audience members have also been asking about being able to volunteer to help with any of the election counting or working at the polls. I don't know if there's a shortage of poll workers, but is there a resource for them if they'd like to help out?
So I love it. I love it. I love it. People are offering before I even have to ask for it. So if you go to vote.ca.gov and scroll down, one of the options you'll see there is a poll worker, not just to get poll worker information, but to submit your name and contact information. We'll connect you with your county elections office, and they can reach out to you to sign you up for three things. Poll workers get training. They'll get PPE this election. We want to make sure we keep you safe and healthy. and compensation. Poll workers do earn a stipend for their service. And I think the big picture here is, yes, there's a lot of poll workers that have helped in prior elections that won't be available this November because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Think all the seniors and retirees that warmly greeted you with a smile when you voted in person. You know, they're the ones that Dr. Fauci is especially suggesting stay home because of their vulnerability. So we are on the search for a new generation of poll workers. If you or anybody you know is healthy and willing and able to volunteer as a poll worker, we'll sign them up. We can use their help.
I've always wanted to be a poll worker, so Dan, I might have to miss the November 3rd webinar so I can go do that.
Okay. Well, so Jessica, if I can just follow up real quick, that's really heartening, and that there has been such a positive response, given the warnings that Dr. Fauci's offered and the appropriate cautions that many older Californians are taking. Can you offer us any kind of status report, any kind of update on the levels of volunteerism? Will you have an adequate number of volunteers to staff polling places on election day? How does it look right now?
So I think you know, most counties are pretty much on track for the number of poll workers that they need, but there's a big asterisk, right? You know, if you follow the COVID numbers, you'll hear that nationally we're on a little bit of an uptick, and so we don't want to take anything for granted. We have a statewide outreach campaign for additional poll workers. We partner with some national organizations. So if you have friends in other states, urge them to go to powerthepolls.org to sign up if they'd like. But every county will tell you what I'm about to tell you. We would rather have many more folks on standby just in case, because somebody who can sign up today, if they're exposed over the next 5 weeks, they're going to cancel, you know, or if they have a relative, a family member, a coworker that was exposed, they may want to play it safe and cancel at the last minute. So we want to make sure we have more than enough poll workers signed up and trained and ready to go than we need. We don't want to get caught on our heels closer to election day.
And once again, Jessica, if I can, just because I think that this is really important, and I'm very happy to hear about all the work that's being done. In at least one state in the primaries, the governor requested National Guard presence in order to make sure that polling places had adequate staffing. Is that a potential fallback here, or are you and Governor Newsom confident that that's not something that would be necessary?
Like, it's a potential fallback, but a very unlikely fallback because of I think how well we have been planning and preparing both state and local election staff, plus this poll worker recruitment and ongoing training that we've mentioned. And at the risk of getting into the weeds here, we know that we worked with county governments, not just the Registrar of Voters Office or the Elections Department office, but county governments writ large to ensure that other county employees are available to help administer this essential government function. For a number of reasons, elections are considered an essential service, and so non-elections employees have to be and will be available if we need them. And so collectively, again, I think we're on track, but don't want to take anything for granted. We'd rather be a little bit more over-prepared than under-prepared.
Thank you. In addition to poll workers, what about people helping to count the ballots that are mailed in? Do you have enough people to do that, or are people able to volunteer to help with that as well?
Yes, and so again, the need for that and the process for that depends on the county. So go to the poll worker site, submit your information, and when the county reaches out to you, you can make some of those specific assignment requests known at that time. The other question I get from time to time is, well, what if I want to, either serve as a poll worker in my own community, or what if I want to serve as a poll worker in another community? Can I make that request? You can certainly make that request. The earlier you sign up, the better the chances are of having your request being met. If you wait too long, they're just going to send you where they need you. As an added incentive, you might have heard new announcements in recent days of some pretty high-profile locations that are now going to be serving as voting locations, places like the Staples Center and Dodger Stadium, et cetera. So if you want to work at a facility like that, the sooner you sign up, the better your chances are.
Great, thank you. Somebody is asking if they are a senior or someone who's not good with computers or they don't have a computer, is there another way for them to get this information?
Absolutely. You know, when I push people to go online for this information, it's not the only source of information. We're still required to send out the voter information guide and other materials to every household with a voter in it. And of course, the county sends out their sample ballots, their supplemental materials by mail as well. So it's not just online.
Thank you so much. Let me get back up here. Has California experienced problems with the vote harvesting?
I know that the terminology has come from people, trying to, cause questions or doubt in how some people choose to return their ballots. So here's really the bottom line. California law empowers voters to decide for themselves how they choose to return their ballots or who they trust to return their ballot for them. If that is the voter's choice. So just to remind folks of their options, the easiest way is probably simply to mail your ballot back. You don't even need stamps. Just make sure that it's postmarked on or before Election Day in order to count. If you choose, you can deliver your ballot to any ballot drop box in the county convenient to you, or you can deliver it in person to any in-person voting location. But sometimes life happens, and you get caught in a pinch, and you need assistance in having someone return your ballot for you. And so you decide for yourself who you trust to return your ballot. They too have to sign the outside of the envelope, so we track a little bit of chain of custody that way. And if you signed up for Where's My Ballot, you'll get the confirmation that your ballot was received by the county and when it was counted.
Thank you. Are ballots still being sent to voters who have lost their homes in the California fires?
Great question. And so sadly, it's not our first election cycle with wildfires having impacted a lot of voters. And so we work extra hard to make sure we communicate to those individuals what their options are for voting. As you may recall, when you register to vote, there's actually two addresses that you can put down. One is your registration address. Where is your residence? That's where you're registered. The second is a mailing address if it's different than your residential address. And so folks that have been displaced, short-term or long-term by the wildfires, can still request their ballot be sent somewhere else, number one, or if they need to re-register because they've lost their home, they can do that easily online at vote.ca.gov. And we still have the catch-all same-day registration option at any in-person voting location. So even if you missed all the deadlines, didn't do it online, you can show up in person during the in-person voting days, register or update your registration, and still cast your ballot right then and there. So we're working with the counties that have been impacted by the wildfires to make sure that voters understand those options.
Thank you. If ballots must be mailed by Monday, October 5th, does that mean most counties are mailing ballots this week?
Frank, there's some counties that have already sent out their vote by mail ballots. So we're live, folks. Election is happening in California. The law requires counties to send out vote by mail ballots no later than October 5th. So yes, expect to see some going out maybe October 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and arriving very soon thereafter. So for a real-time insight, sign up for Where's My Ballot, and you'll know when yours is in the mail.
Thank you. This person says, glad we have a good and trustworthy voting system. Why don't politicians agree on a national standard to avoid the chaos we are experiencing each presidential election?
How I wish, but I think that fate was written into the U.S. Constitution, where the authority over elections is delegated to states, and that's why you hear about the differences state by state by state by state. I am a member of the National Association of Secretaries of State, where we come together on a nonpartisan basis to exchange ideas and best practices and that sort of thing. And for the most part, secretaries are kind of on the same page. Especially during COVID. Many states, both with Republican and Democratic secretaries expanding vote by mail, those sorts of things. You have some outliers, unfortunately, but I think over time we'll move towards even more of a standardization of elections administration, not quite a centralization, but a standardization.
Thank you. On election night, we're used to seeing the percent of precincts reporting. With all the mail-in ballots, that seems misleading. Can you report instead the percent of ballots counted?
So great question. Somebody's really paying attention to detail here. And it's been a dynamic that we've been tracking for several years now. So both we've made appropriate changes on our website, and we've asked news outlets to do the same. When you see percent of precincts reporting on election night as we're all tracking the numbers coming in, that doesn't mean that, if you see 100% precincts reporting, it doesn't mean that 100% of the ballots have been counted. It simply means that we have some kind of numbers from every precinct in that jurisdiction. It's impossible to predict on election night how many ballots remain to be counted because we don't know how many are still in the mail stream. Right? California law says as long as it's postmarked on or before election day, it can arrive up to 3 days later. We've extended that deadline to 17 days this year. So we're not going to know for several days how many more ballots remain to be counted or processed. And so we can't give you that percentage in real time. We can tell you how many places we've heard from, but a couple of days after the election, what we do start providing is an unprocessed ballot status report. And you can look up at the elections division website on our Secretary of State's page, county by county, how many ballots in, vote by mail, et cetera, provisional ballots, same-day registration, and over the course of the couple of weeks, see that number go down as more and more are being processed. So we do try to be as transparent as possible.
Thank you. How will mail-in voting impact exit polling?
Again, a good question. I think more geared towards news outlets, and I've been encouraging them to rely less on the exit polling alone to predict winners, especially with so many more people voting by mail. The in-person voting population is less reflective of the overall electorate. So if you hear about some exit polling, then I hope their methodology takes that into account, and it's a combined methodology of in-person surveys with whether it's by phone, by email, a sample of the people who vote by mail. But I think that's more towards the media outlets than us.
Jessica, if I can just interject there for a second, because it's a smart question, and Alex's answer is the exact right one. There's 2 national exit polls that are run, and it's clearly they've been listening to his advice, because both of them have adjusted their modeling and are adjusting not only talk to people who physically go to the polls on election day, but to sample a large plurality of those who voted by mail or who voted early. Jessica, if I can jump in and ask her one final question before we let him get on with his work. I received a piece of direct mail from you not too long ago, Alex, and it began with the following statement. It said, "If I had a superpower, it would be to ensure that every eligible citizen registered to vote and voted in our election." So I guess I have a 2-part question for you. One, is that really the superpower you'd want? And more seriously, I know that you'll put out, as you do every election cycle, an official prediction much closer to election day on voter turnout. But there are concerns this year, as there all are every year, about lower turnouts among voters from communities of color and from young people. I'm wondering if even if it's a few weeks in advance of your official projection, what do you see in terms of likely voter turnout in California this year? Yeah. And what would that superpower be?
All right. Well, the serious question first, and then the fun question. So a little bit of a correction, Dan. I do not put out in advance of election day a projection or forecast of what turnout's going to be. I usually say strong or okay or record breaking, but I never put a number out there. I know there's a couple of other states that do. It's amusing to watch, but look, if voter registration is any indicator, I know it's going to be a strong turnout this November. And part of our job is, yes, to keep things safe and secure, but also as accessible as possible. So I'm hoping we break another record this November. To your question about disparities or participation gaps between communities. This is my 6th year as Secretary of State. We've moved the needle significantly on voter registration. I think have closed the registration gap between historically communities that have historically registered at lower rates, communities of color, young people, lower income communities, et cetera. All the things that we've done to make it easier to be able to vote for eligible citizens, I think should be closing that gap on the voter participation rate as well. But whether you're voting for the first time, you're a longtime infrequent voter, or you voted, for decades, there are some changes that everybody needs to be aware of for this November. So voter education is hugely, hugely important. And our comprehensive voter education campaign is multilingual. It is statewide. It is multimedia. It is all those things to try to reach every eligible voter in the state of California. So I think that's the answer to the main question. In terms of my superpower, is that really what I would want my superpower to be? It's a close contest between 100% registration and participation and being able to find a COVID-19 vaccine, because boy, would that be a game changer. Forget politics here for a second, just for the health and safety of everybody around the world, and we can get our kids back in school in person, and we can thank our teachers, leave the education to the professionals.
We're rooting for you on both.
Thank you so much, Dan. Secretary Padilla, such an important and timely discussion, and we appreciate you sharing your insight with us. For those that joined us, we hope you enjoyed today's program and that you'll continue to help us make these events possible by becoming a member, visiting our website, www.lawacth.org, that's a long one, to make a donation, or by texting election to the number that you see on your screen. We can't do this without your support. We have some great events coming up. This Thursday, Dan will be back with his weekly series, Politics in the Time of Coronavirus. Next Tuesday, October 6th, we'll have former presidential candidate at South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg. So please go to our website at lawacth.org to register for these events and join as a member with great benefits or to make a donation. Stay safe, stay informed, and we will see you soon. Secretary Padilla, thanks again so much. Dan.